Have you
Hey,
ever
there she
seen a
is.
little girl
Come here,
walk into
pumpkin.
a billionaire's office, holding a tiny basket and asking, with all the innocence in the world, how much does a father cost? What happened next shook the CEO to his core and changed all of their lives forever. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? No one ever walked into Callum Hayes' office without an appointment, especially not a 5-year-old asking where she could buy a dad. The words floated in the stillness of the 12th floor, slipping between the quiet hum of the HVAC and the faint rustle of autumn wind brushing against the windows that overlooked Bellingham Bay. Callum had been standing with a file in hand, reviewing numbers the way other people read morning devotionals, when the tiny voice fractured his concentration. The headquarters of Hayes Medical Group was a place of order. Assistants spoke softly. Elevator doors glided open with quiet dignity, and visitors were screened long before they reached executive offices. Yet on this muted fall afternoon, as golden leaves spiraled down Cornwall Avenue below, a small figure stepped into Callum's pristine world as if she'd always belonged there. She stood just past the threshold, a little girl in a worn purple hoodie, sleeves swallowing her hands, a frayed storybook dangling from her fingers. Maisie Quinn looked up with a seriousness far older than her years, her eyes bright and searching, taking in everything from the award plaques on the far wall to the way sunlight caught the edge of Callum's watch. "Sir," she repeated more politely this time, "do you know where people buy a dad?" The file slipped from Callum's hand and hit the glossy floor with a soft smack. In all his decades of working, negotiating, denying, approving, and leading, he had never once been asked a question he truly didn't know how to answer until now. Before he could speak, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. A woman rushed in, her hair slightly damp from constant hospital washing, ER scrubs visible beneath her coat. Rowan Quinn reached her daughter with a breathless mix of panic and relief. "Maisie, oh sweetheart, no. You can't just wander off like that." Her voice trembled as she pulled the child close. Turning to Callum, she offered an apologetic nod. "Mr. Hayes, I am so sorry." I was dropping off paperwork, and she slipped away before I could stop her. Maisie nestled into her mother's shoulder, yet kept her gaze fixed on Callum, as if still hoping he would hand her an answer or a product off some invisible shelf. "It's all right," Callum murmured, though the words felt foreign in his mouth. He wasn't used to softening his tone. He wasn't used to children standing in his office either, or unexpected warmth flickering in his chest. Maisie shifted upright. "Mom says good dads are expensive." Rowan flushed immediately. "Maisie, we don't say things like that. But you said it when we couldn't buy groceries last week." The girl spoke it plainly, without defensiveness, just truth, the way children carry it. Silence spread through the room, the kind no one wants, but no one knows how to break. Callum looked at Rowan, then a proper look. A woman worn from long shifts, worry in her shoulders, determination behind tired eyes. Then back at the girl whose honesty had cracked open his carefully built distance. Kneeling slightly so his gaze met hers, he asked quietly, "Why would you want to buy one?" Maisie blinked once. Her answer simple and devastating. "'Cause I'm tired of not having one." The sentence struck him in a place he rarely touched. In a life of private tutors, rotating nannies, and holiday cards from parents traveling somewhere else, the ache of being without had lived long in him too, though he'd buried it under schedules and success. Rowan straightened. "Okay, sweetheart, we've taken enough of Mr. Hayes' time." Her voice softened toward Callum. "Thank you for being patient. Really." She gathered Maisie's storybook, smoothing the bent cover as if apologizing for its wear, then lifted her daughter into her arms. Maisie's small fingers clung to Rowan's collar, but her eyes lingered on Callum, curious, hopeful, maybe even searching. Callum watched them turn toward the hallway, a strange pull in his chest he didn't have a name for, something unsettled yet familiar, something he thought he'd outgrown long ago. Rowan carried Maisie down the hallway with a mother's practiced urgency, her steps quick but gentle, the kind of movement shaped by years of caring for other people's children in emergency rooms. Callum watched them leave from inside his office, the door still partly open, the fading echo of their voices brushing against the quiet like a small breeze that had slipped into a sealed room. He bent to pick up the contract he had dropped earlier, but his fingers only rested on the papers for a moment before he straightened again. The rows of numbers, projections, and deadlines suddenly looked strangely flat, useful, important, even, but hollow when compared to the raw honesty he had just witnessed. The office around him regained its familiar rhythm. Someone down the hall laughed softly. Phones rang in distant cubicles. A printer hummed from the operations wing. Yet, despite everything falling back into place, something in him remained slightly out of alignment, like a picture frame that had been nudged just enough to make the room feel different. He walked to the wide window overlooking Bellingham Bay. Fishing boats drifted lazily across the water, and the first hints of evening light stretched across the rooftops. He had looked out at this same view every day for years, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a backdrop. It felt like a reminder of time passing, of seasons changing, of small moments that mattered more than a man like him usually allowed. Behind him, the faint hum of the elevator signaled its descent. Rowan and Maisie were already gone, but the softness in their leaving lingered like the warm trail of a fading scent. He could still hear Maisie's tiny, earnest voice repeating her impossible question. He had built a life that answered everything except that. He crossed the office slowly, loosening his tie without thinking. The assistant at her desk looked up in surprise when he stepped out into the hallway. "Mr. Hayes, the board is waiting on your virtual briefing," she reminded softly. Callum paused, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his glasses. "Move it to tomorrow morning." The assistant blinked. Are you sure?" "Yes," he said, with a tone that was firm but quieter than usual. "I'm stepping out." He walked past her before she could respond, heading toward the elevator with long, unhurried strides. His reflection followed him in the silver metallic doors, sharp suit, composed expression, the picture of a man who had mastered control. Yet the feeling in his chest didn't match the reflection at all. He pressed the lobby button, and the doors slid shut. The descent was slow. He watched the illuminated floor numbers blink down one by one, listening to the hum of the machinery, the soft clink of his watch against the rail. Little moments he never noticed suddenly felt larger, as if his senses were adjusting to take in a world he had rushed past for too long. He exhaled, long and steady, not out of frustration, out of realization. When the elevator opened, the lobby was quiet. A few employees walked past with coffee cups and jackets draped over their arms. Outside the glass doors, the air had turned crisp, tinted with the smell of early autumn and the sound of traffic rolling gently along the street. Callum stepped forward. He didn't know why exactly. He had no plan, no polished explanation. Only a feeling new, unfamiliar, but steady. He pushed open the door and let the cool air wrap around him as he walked out of the building, leaving the day behind as if something small but important had just shifted its place inside him. The next morning arrived quietly, the way mornings often do in Bellingham, when the fog still settles low over the bay, and people move a bit slower, wrapped in sweaters and the comfort of routine. Callum stepped into the lobby of his building earlier than usual, the soft murmur of employees greeting him with polite nods. He acknowledged them with a faint lift of his chin, though his thoughts were still drifting somewhere between yesterday's unexpected encounter and the quiet restlessness it had left behind. He had tried, after stepping outside the previous evening, to settle back into his normal schedule. He'd even gone to the gym, stared at the treadmill, and attempted to drown his thoughts in numbers and speed settings. But every now and then the image of a little girl in a worn purple hoodie resurfaced, carrying with it a question he had never been equipped to answer. By the time he reached the 12th floor, his assistant was already at her desk, typing quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said, pausing. "The board meeting has been moved to 10, as requested." "Thank you," he replied. She hesitated, then added, "There's also a note left for you, from the clinic downstairs." Callum raised an eyebrow. Notes were usually from suppliers or insurance reps, not the company clinic. He accepted the folded paper and stepped into his office. The room was still dim, early sunlight barely breaking through the tall windows. When he opened the note, the handwriting was unmistakably neat, steady strokes formed by long hours writing patient charts. "Thank you for being kind yesterday. Rowan Quinn." Callum stared at the words for a moment longer than necessary. He wasn't used to personal notes. Gratitude, when directed toward him, usually came from shareholders, not exhausted mothers. He set the note gently on his desk. Minutes later, he found himself pressing the elevator button for the lower floors, instead of reviewing the documents waiting on his desk. The clinic sat quietly at the southeast corner of the building, smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender from a diffuser someone in HR insisted calmed patients. A receptionist waved politely when he walked in. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Dr. Quinn is with a staff physical, but she should be done shortly if you want to wait." He wasn't sure why he nodded. He wasn't even sure what he planned to say, but he took a seat in the small waiting room anyway, staring at a poster about flu shots, as if it required deep concentration. A few minutes later, Rowan stepped out of one of the exam rooms. She stopped short when she saw him, her surprise clear but not unwelcome. Today, her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and though traces of fatigue still lingered, she looked more rested than she had yesterday. "Mr. Hayes," she said, smoothing her coat automatically. "I didn't expect to see you down here." He stood. "I got your note." Color warmed her cheeks. "I just thought, well, not everyone handles Maisie's questions with patience." "She's direct," he replied, a faint curve to his expression. "It's disarming." "Oh." Rowan let out a small breath that could have been a laugh. "That's one word for it." An awkward but comfortable silence settled between them. He noticed the way she held her clipboard, a habit born from years of needing her hands to stay busy. She noticed the way he stood too straight, as if unused to rooms not built for authority. "Is she all right?" he asked finally. "Maisie?" "Yes. Curious as ever, but she's fine." Rowan eased her grip on the clipboard. "I'm sorry again for yesterday. She didn't mean to disrupt anything." "It wasn't a disruption," he said simply. And for once, he meant it. Before more could be said, a small figure appeared at the doorway to the daycare across the hall. Maisie stood with a half-finished craft in her hand, a paper leaf covered in glitter. When she spotted Callum, her face lit with the kind of open, unfiltered recognition that only children held on to. "You're the man from yesterday," she announced proudly. Callum blinked, and Rowan nearly swallowed a groan. "Maisie," she whispered, mortified, "use your inside voice." But Callum didn't seem bothered. If anything, a hint of warmth touched his features. Maisie marched forward until she stood in front of him, holding up her paper leaf. "We're making fall trees. Do you have one in your office?" He opened his mouth, paused, then answered truthfully. "No, I don't." Maisie pressed the glittering leaf into his hand. "Now you do." Rowan closed her eyes briefly in embarrassment, but Callum looked down at the fragile craft with a quiet sense of something unfamiliar, yet not unpleasant. He wasn't accustomed to receiving handmade objects, especially ones born from glue sticks and imagination. He cleared his throat gently. "Thank you, Maisie. It's very thoughtful." The girl grinned, already skipping back toward the daycare door. Rowan exhaled. "She likes giving things to people she thinks are lonely." "Huh." Callum looked up sharply. Rowan froze. "I didn't mean she just picks up on things. Doesn't always understand them." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked again at the glittering paper leaf resting in his palm, delicate and easy to bend if held too tightly. His voice, when it came, was soft. "Children see truth differently." Rowan nodded, and for a moment, brief but unmistakably real, they stood there in a silence that felt less like awkwardness and more like recognition. Rowan guided Maisie back toward the daycare entrance, giving the teacher a grateful nod as the door gently closed behind her daughter. When she turned back, Callum was still standing exactly where she'd left him, the glittering paper leaf resting carefully in his hand as though he feared bending it. "I'm sorry about that," Rowan said, rubbing her forehead lightly. "She gets attached quickly. It's something I've been trying to help her manage." Callum studied the leaf a second longer before answering. "It's all right. Children attached to kindness. It's a good thing." Then, in a quieter tone, he added, "Even if adults forget how to do it." His words carried a softness Rowan didn't expect. And for a moment she simply looked at him, really looked. Beneath the suit and the practiced composure he wore like a uniform, there was something unsure, something almost hesitant. Like a man learning a language he'd never been taught. Have you ever seen a little girl walk into a billionaire's office, holding a tiny basket, and asking, with all the innocence in the world, "How much does a father cost?" What happened next shook the CEO to his core and changed all of their lives forever. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. I should get back to work. He inclined his head. "Of course." but neither of them moved immediately. Rowan cleared her throat softly. About what she said. The loneliness thing. Kids don't always understand context. It didn't mean anything. He met her gaze with a steadiness that caught her off guard. Maybe it meant more than you think. She opened her mouth, but whatever she meant to say dissolved as she saw a flicker of something vulnerable pass across his features, gone in a heartbeat, but unmistakably real. For a man known for authority and precision, it felt like a door creaking open. Before the moment stretched too long, she pulled herself gently back to professionalism. Well, thank you again, Mr. Hayes. He hesitated only a second before responding, Call me Callum. The simple request hung between them with an unexpected weight, like an offering laid carefully on a table. Rowan blinked, surprised, then nodded. All right, Callum. He seemed faintly relieved, though he masked it quickly. Have a good day, Dr. Quinn. You too, she said. And thank you for the kindness yesterday. I meant it. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slipped the paper leaf carefully into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, treating it with a reverence that felt almost out of place in the sterile hallway. But to Rowan, it wasn't out of place at all. She watched him walk toward the elevator's steady steps, measured posture, a quietness following him like a shadow he wasn't used to carrying. At the elevator doors, he glanced back briefly, as if committing something to memory, then stepped inside. Rowan stood there for a moment longer after he'd gone, her fingers tightening around her clipboard. She reminded herself that this was just a polite gesture, a brief moment of gratitude. Nothing more. People like Callum Hayes lived in different worlds, stable, controlled, wrapped in success. People like her moved through chaos, long nights, and small victories. And yet, the way he looked at that paper leaf, the way Maisie beamed when she saw him. Rowan shook the thoughts away gently. She had a shift to finish, charts to review, patience to see. Life didn't slow down just because something unexpected brushed against it. Still, as she walked back toward the exam room, she felt a small warmth she hadn't carried in a long while. Not hope exactly, just a soft awareness that something had changed, however slightly. And somewhere between the clinic door and the quiet hum of the hallway, she realized she didn't mind that change at all. The next week arrived with a softness that settled over Bellingham like a wool blanket cool mornings, pale sunshine drifting through maple branches, and the faint smell of roasted coffee slipping out from the corner cafes. Callum had spent most of those mornings pacing, thinking, reconsidering, then pacing some more. His assistant noticed, of course. She always did. But she didn't ask questions, and he didn't offer explanations. By Friday, he made a decision. When Rowan stepped into the clinic's hallway after finishing a consultation, she found Callum waiting not with the stiff posture of an executive, but standing with his hands lightly clasped, as if reminding himself not to fidget. Good morning, Dr. Quinn, he said. She blinked, surprised. Callum, I didn't know you were down here today. I wanted to speak with you about something. He paused, searching for the right phrasing. It's regarding an opportunity, a professional one. And Rowan straightened, guarded but polite. All right. I've been reviewing the structure of our staff support, he said. Our current on-site medical coverage is limited, and I believe we need a full-time attending physician for our employees. Someone capable. Someone who understands families and the community. And you think that's me? She asked, tone gentle, but cautious. Yes. The answer came quickly, too quickly, to be anything but honest. You're qualified, you're compassionate, and your work yesterday reminded me how much our people need someone like you. Rowan held her clipboard a little tighter. Callum, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm looking to change positions. You wouldn't lose stability, he added. The schedule is predictable. Better hours, benefits, a salary that reflects the work you do. He hesitated before continuing. And time with your daughter. You'd have more of it. The honesty in his voice softened her. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't selling. He was offering. Rowan breathed in slowly. The thought of shorter shifts of dinner with Maisie that didn't involve reheating leftovers at 9 p.m., of mornings without scrambling for childcare, was tempting. More than tempting. But she'd spent years in the ER because it was what she knew. the kind of work that shaped her identity. Stepping away felt like abandoning a part of herself. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," he said, almost relieved. "Take all the time you need." Before more could be said, footsteps pattered across the hallway. Maisie came running from the daycare, her shoes tapping lightly against the linoleum. She stopped abruptly when she saw Callum, her grin widening. "You came back," she announced proudly. Callum felt something warm tug at his ribs. "I did." Maisie thrust a construction paper pumpkin into his hands. "We're making fall decorations today. You should put this in your office, too." "Yeah." He accepted it with the same care he would give a fragile instrument. Rowan gave her daughter a gentle tap on the shoulder. "Sweetheart, say thank you for visiting. And let's not interrupt Mr. Hayes." "I'm not interrupting," Maisie said confidently. "He likes me." Callum didn't deny it. The daycare teacher called from across the hall, and Maisie waved dramatically before hurrying back, leaving an orange trail of glitter in her wake. Rowan sighed, embarrassed but smiling. "I'm sorry." She gets excited. "She's expressive," he answered. "It's refreshing." Rowan tilted her head slightly, studying him. There was something different about him today, not the polished executive she first met, but a man learning to let the edges soften a little. "Let me look over the offer," she said. "I promise I'll give it proper thought." Callum nodded. "Thank you. And, Rowan, regardless of your decision, I meant what I said. You're the kind of doctor we need." She seemed touched by that, and for a moment, something unspoken hung between them, a quiet understanding shaped by two different lives brushing gently against each other. Back upstairs, Callum returned to his office. He placed the construction paper pumpkin beside the glittering leaf from the day before. The two crafts sat there together, bright and messy, and entirely out of place against the polished wood and gleaming glass. He didn't move them. If anything, their presence felt like a reminder, unexpected, fragile, and strangely comforting that maybe life didn't have to look perfect to feel meaningful. Rowan didn't sleep much that weekend, though not for the usual reasons. There were no emergency calls, no late-night sirens pulling her from bed. Instead, she lay awake thinking about the offer, the kind of offer that didn't come twice, the kind that quietly reshaped the way a person saw their future. On Sunday afternoon, while Maisie napped under a blanket decorated with tiny foxes, Rowan sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten beside her. Bills were tucked neatly in a stack, a habit she kept to avoid looking at them too long. Her gaze drifted instead to the fridge, where a handful of drawings clung under mismatched magnets. Maisie, a tree, a house, always, a house with stick-figure windows and big round hearts. Stability, predictability, a life that didn't require improvising childcare every other day. The decision, when it finally settled in her chest, felt surprisingly peaceful. On Monday morning, she arrived at Hayes Medical Group earlier than usual. Her scrubs were traded for simple slacks and a soft blue sweater, the kind of outfit she rarely wore because ER work demanded something sturdier. The receptionist greeted her, and Rowan offered a small smile as she approached the elevator. Upstairs, Callum was reviewing reports when his assistant buzzed in. "Dr. Quinn is here to see you." Callum straightened a little too quickly. "Send her in." Rowan entered with her usual calm composure, though her eyes held a different glimmer today, resolve, lined with a hint of nervous hope. "I've thought about your offer," she said. He set the papers aside. "And I'd like to accept." The relief that washed over his features came so quickly he didn't bother to hide it. "That's wonderful news. Truly." Rowan let out a small breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "It feels like the right step. For me and for Maisie." "Of course," he said, and there was something sincere in the way he said her daughter's name, something that made Rowan feel unexpectedly grounded. By mid-morning, HR had completed the paperwork, and Rowan was officially the on-site physician for Hayes Medical Group. Callum offered to show her around the medical suite she'd be overseeing, but Rowan politely declined. "I think I should learn it the normal way," she said with a gentle smile. "Let people meet me without you standing behind them." Callum couldn't help the soft huff of amusement. Fair enough. Rowan spent the next few hours familiarizing herself with the clinic's layout. It was smaller than the ER, but warmer, lined with soft lighting, framed nature prints, and shelves of neatly organized supplies. There was no chaos here, no alarms, no shouting, no frantic decisions. For the first time in years, she felt the absence of constant adrenaline, and it soothed something in her she hadn't realized was tired. Around noon, she stepped into the break room and found Callum sitting at a small table with a simple lunch soup in a paper cup and a sandwich, cut too precisely to have come from anywhere but the building cafe. "You eat here?" she asked, amused. "I try," he answered. "My assistant says skipping lunch sets a bad example." He gestured toward the seat across from him. "Join me?" She hesitated. Then Saturday, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of brewed coffee lingering in the air. For a moment, Rowan forgot she was technically sitting with her boss. They were just two people sharing a quiet noon hour. "How's your first day going?" he asked. "Calm," she said. "Almost unnervingly so. You'll get used to it." "I hope so." She stirred her soup thoughtfully. "Callum, thank you. This means a lot." He met her gaze. "You earned it, Em." The simplicity of his statement carried more weight than anything elaborate could have. Rowan felt a warmth settle inside her chest, steady and gentle, like sunlight finding a corner of a room long left dim. Before she could reply, a familiar, excited voice echoed from the hallway outside the break room. Mom, I drew a cat." Maisie suddenly appeared in the doorway, her paper in hand, her grin enormous. She halted when she saw Callum and held the drawing a bit higher, as if wanting to impress both adults equally. Rowan smiled. "Sweetheart, slow down. Where's your teacher?" "She said I could show you real quick," Maisie explained, then turned to Callum with an earnest seriousness. "Do you like cats?" He blinked, as if no one had asked him that in years. "I suppose I do." Maisie nodded approvingly. "Good. Cats are good judges of people." The honesty of her declaration made Rowan stifle a laugh behind her hand. Maisie stepped closer and offered the drawing to her mother, but Callum caught the faintest hint of hesitation, as if the little girl had almost handed it to him instead. Rowan brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. "Thank you, honey. Now let's get you back before your class misses you." Maisie nodded and ran out again, her shoes squeaking against the tile. Rowan watched her go, affection softening her features. When she turned back to Callum, he was looking at the doorway where the child had disappeared, his expression quiet, thoughtful, touched by something he didn't speak aloud. "It's a good first day," Rowan said. Callum nodded. "It is." And for the first time since he'd taken the CEO role all those years ago, he felt that the company he led and the life he lived might be changing in a way that didn't scare him. Not anymore. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm, the kind that slipped quietly into place before anyone realized a new pattern had begun. Autumn deepened across Bellingham, maple leaves brightened, rain softened the afternoons, and the air carried that familiar coolness hinting winter was not far behind. Within Hayes Medical Group, life moved steadily, but for Callum Hayes, something about the pace of his days had changed in ways he didn't fully understand. It began simply enough. A small visit to the daycare on the 5th floor. Just a quick stop during his lunch break, he told himself. He had paperwork in hand, an excuse ready, something about checking on new safety updates and ensuring protocols were up to date. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to see if Maisie was doing all right. When he stepped inside, the room smelled of crayons and apple slices, and bright-colored mats lay scattered across the floor. Children's voices floated around him in soft laughter. And there, sitting cross-legged on the rug, was Maisie, her hair held back by a crooked barrette, her face shining with focus as she built a wobbly tower of wooden blocks. She noticed him before he made a sound. "Callum!" she called, waving so enthusiastically that 2 blocks tumbled from her half-built tower. He paused, struck by the ease with which she said his name. No title, no hesitation, no fear, just the simple certainty that he belonged in her world the same way she belonged in it. He knelt beside her. "What are you building?" "A castle," she said proudly. "But it keeps falling 'cause the floor's not listening." "The floor?" He raised an eyebrow. She nodded with great seriousness. "Some floors listen, some don't." He tried not to smile. Together they rebuilt the tower, Maisie placing pieces with the fierce concentration of someone performing delicate surgery, and Callum holding the base steady to keep it from wobbling. When the last block slid into place, Maisie let out a soft gasp of triumph. "We did it!" Callum looked at the tower, oddly proud of the small, crooked monument. "We did." It would have been easy to stand up and walk out then, to return to meetings, to the comfort of routine. But something about the way Maisie's eyes lingered on him, hopeful and expectant, made him stay longer than he intended. Long enough to see her draw a picture of him and her mother standing under a tree with orange leaves. Long enough to hear her talk about her upcoming class play. Long enough to let the world soften around the edges. When he finally stood to leave, Maisie tugged on his sleeve. "Come back tomorrow?" "Maybe," he said, though. Something in him already knew he would. Later that afternoon, he found Rowan reviewing charts in her small office just off the clinic hallway. She looked up when he knocked on the doorframe. "Callum?" she greeted with a warm but tired smile. "Everything all right?" He hesitated before speaking. "I stopped by the daycare today." Rowan froze mid-reach for a pen. Was she okay?" "She was fine," he assured quickly. "More than fine. She's happy." Rowan relaxed, leaning back in her chair. "Good. Sometimes she has a hard time when I'm working long hours." "Oh." Callum stepped inside and handed her the small crayon drawing Maisie had given him 3 uneven figures under a tree, with the sky scribbled in wide blue strokes. Rowan's expression softened, her eyes lingering on the crooked smiles. "She draws a lot. It helps her feel connected." "She's quite the artist," he said quietly. Rowan looked up at him then, not as her boss, not as a stranger, but as someone who had unexpectedly stepped into a part of her daughter's world. "Thank you," she said, "for spending time with her." "It was nothing," he replied. But the truth was written in the way he held himself gentle, almost careful, as though something inside him was shifting and he wasn't sure how to name it yet. As the afternoon light faded into soft gold across her desk, they lingered there a moment longer, sharing the quiet in a way that felt natural, unforced, and neither of them realized it yet, but something small and steady had begun to weave itself into place thread by thread, gesture by gesture, growing into a connection neither of them had expected but both would soon depend on. The following days carried a quiet pattern, one that folded itself gently into Callum's routine, without him ever consciously deciding it. He still arrived early, still managed departments, still signed off on budgets and reviewed proposals. But the texture of his days felt different now, less rigid at the edges, less airless. As though a window somewhere had been cracked open, letting in a breeze he hadn't noticed he needed. It was Rowan who first noticed the change. On Tuesday afternoon, she passed the break area and found him leaning awkwardly over a child-sized table in the daycare, attempting unsuccessfully to tie a small bow onto Maisie's art project. He was frowning at the ribbon, as if it had personally betrayed him. "You're doing it wrong," Maisie said helpfully, standing beside him with her hands on her hips. "I've gathered that," Callum murmured, his fingers wrestling with the stubborn knot. Rowan paused at the doorway, unseen for a moment, watching the scene unfold. The CEO of one of the largest medical groups in the region, a man known for precision and control, was kneeling on the carpeted floor of a daycare, trying to tie a lavender ribbon onto a cardboard star. Maisie groaned dramatically. "You're supposed to fold it like bunny ears." Callum looked at her, baffled. "Bunny? Ears?" She demonstrated with exaggerated movements, puffing her cheeks out like a rabbit. Callum attempted to imitate her and ended up with a twisted loop that made Rowan bite back a laugh. Maisie sighed, patting his shoulder. "It's okay. You'll get better." When Rowan finally stepped inside, Callum straightened too quickly and bumped his knee on the tiny table. "Oh, Dr. Quinn, just Rowan," she reminded gently. "And I see you're getting an art lesson." He cleared his throat, smoothing his tie even though it had stayed perfectly in place. "I'm learning." "Oh." Maisie waved the star proudly. "I taught him the bunny ear trick. He almost got it." "Almost," Callum repeated with a small, self-deprecating smile. Rowan knelt beside them and easily tied the bow with 2 swift motions. Maisie beamed. "Mom's better." Rowan ruffled her daughter's hair. "Your mom has had a lot more practice." As Maisie returned to her friends, Rowan stayed beside Callum for another moment. "You don't have to do all this, you know." "I know," he said quietly. "I just want to." The simplicity of the confession settled between them like soft dust. Rowan felt something warm move through her chest. Not romantic, not rushed. Just the calm recognition of someone showing up without being asked. Later that week, during a rainy afternoon when the office lights glowed against the gray sky, Callum found himself pacing the hallway before stopping outside the clinic. He knocked lightly on Rowan's open door. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She looked up from her laptop. "Of course." He stepped inside, holding a small box. Rowan raised an eyebrow. "This isn't anything dramatic," he assured. "Just something I thought might help." She opened the box and found a set of new digital thermometers, an otoscope, and a few upgraded diagnostic tools items she'd quietly mentioned needing, but hadn't expected him to remember, much less act on. "Callum," she said softly, touched. "You didn't have to." I know," he replied again, with that same understated honesty. "But if you're taking care of everyone here, you should have what you need." She ran a thumb over one of the sleek instruments, her expression softening. "Thank you." A pause lingered gentle natural before she set the box down and looked at him more closely. "You're different lately," she said. "Not in a bad way, just different." Callum looked toward the window, watching rain streak in slow lines down the glass. "Maybe I'm just learning what matters." Rowan didn't push. She simply nodded with the acceptance of someone who understood that quiet transformations are often the most honest ones. A little later, when she walked him toward the hallway, they heard laughter from the daycare children playing, the bright sound echoing softly through the building. Maisie's voice rose above the others, calling out instructions for an imaginary game. Rowan paused, listening. "She's doing better," she said. Callum nodded. "She's remarkable." Rowan glanced sideways at him. "You're good with her." He looked almost startled by the compliment. "I try. You don't have to try so hard," she said gently. "Kids feel effort. They also feel sincerity. You have that." Callum let the words settle, unsure what to do with the unexpected warmth they carried. As Rowan returned to her office and he headed back to the elevator, the rhythm of his steps felt calmer than usual, even steady. There was no rush to return to meetings, no urgent pull to fill the silence with tasks or numbers. For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full, in its own quiet way. And though he didn't say it out loud, something in him knew he was learning more in these small moments than he ever had in boardrooms or strategy sessions. Perhaps, he thought as he stepped into the elevator, this was what showing up looked like. The shift from autumn to early winter arrived quietly in Bellingham. Overnight, the air grew sharper and the morning fog lingered a little longer over the bay. People walked a bit faster, hands tucked deeper into their coat pockets, scarves wrapped snug around their necks. Inside Hayes Medical Group, the hallway smelled faintly of peppermint tea. Someone in HR had set out a basket of seasonal brews near the elevators. It was on one of these chilled mornings that Rowan received a call from the daycare while she was reviewing medical logs in her office. The teacher's voice was gentle but concerned. "Maisie has a fever. Not high yet, but she's asking for you." Rowan immediately stood, grabbing her coat. "I'll be right there." But when she reached the hallway outside the daycare, she found someone already sitting on the small bench outside the door, Callum. He had one hand resting on his knee, the other holding a slightly crumpled brochure about children's symptoms, as if he'd read it too many times while waiting. He looked up as Rowan approached, and the expression on his face wasn't one she saw often, not the composed CEO, not the practiced professional. Instead, there was worry etched there, raw and unfiltered. "Is she all right?" he asked before Rowan could speak. She blinked. "You got here fast." I was on the 5th floor checking a maintenance request," he said quickly, though Rowan suspected that wasn't the whole truth. "One of the teachers came into the hall to get a thermometer. She mentioned Maisie didn't look well. I thought..." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The worry in his voice filled in all the missing pieces. Rowan placed a steadying hand on his arm. "She probably just caught a seasonal bug. Kids do that." Callum nodded, though it didn't ease his furrowed brow. Inside the daycare, Maisie sat curled up on a beanbag chair, wrapped in a blanket decorated with cartoon snowflakes. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly damp against her forehead. When she saw Rowan, she lifted her arms weakly. "Mum." Rowan knelt and pressed a hand to her daughter's forehead. "You're warm, sweetheart. We'll take you home." Callum stood a few steps behind them, unsure whether he should approach. Maisie noticed him anyway, her tired eyes softening. "You came," she whispered. He nodded gently. "Of course." Rowan lifted Maisie into her arms. But the little girl reached one hand toward Callum, small fingers brushing the sleeve of his suit jacket. "Come too," she murmured. Callum froze, caught between instinct and uncertainty, between the formality of his role and the simple request of a sick child. Rowan gave him a searching look, one that held no expectation, just openness. "If you have time," she said softly, "you can walk with us to the car." He exhaled, a breath that released more tension than he intended. "Yes, I'd like that." They moved slowly through the hallway, Rowan cradling Maisie while Callum walked beside them, careful not to rush, as if matching his pace to theirs. Employees passing by offered sympathetic smiles, unaware of how unusual it was to see their CEO like this quiet, attentive, present. Outside, the air was cold enough to make Rowan's breath fog as she strapped Maisie into her booster seat. The little girl shivered, and before Rowan could reach into her bag, Callum shrugged off his scarf, the soft gray wool one his assistant had gifted him last Christmas, and wrapped it loosely around Maisie's neck. She leaned into the warmth, her eyes fluttering. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly as she closed the car door. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied. There was no arrogance in the words, only a simple truth, spoken gently. Rowan paused, studying him for a beat longer than she normally would. "She'll be all right. I'll take her home, give her something for the fever, let her rest. I've done this 100 times. He nodded, though his eyes didn't leave the car window where Maisie now lay dozing. "If you need anything, medications, supplies, help call me." "You really care about her," Rowan said, not as a question, but as a quiet realization. Callum's gaze softened. "I do." For a moment, the winter air felt less biting, the morning quieter, the parking lot strangely peaceful. Rowan offered a small, grateful smile, then opened the driver's door. "I'll update you later," she promised. "I'll be waiting," he said, voice steady, but threaded with something newly fragile. Rowan climbed into the car, started the engine, and pulled away slowly. Callum watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, his hands tucked into his pockets, scarfless now in the cold, but not seeming to notice. When he finally turned to walk back inside, he did so more slowly than usual, as though leaving a piece of himself right there in the crisp morning air. Rowan carried Maisie into their small living room and settled her on the couch under the quilt her mother had sewn years ago. The fever was still warm, but calmer than earlier. As Rowan prepared some medicine in the kitchen, her phone buzzed. "Callum, is she home?" Rowan, "Yes, she's resting." Callum, "Do you need anything?" "Soup? A humidifier?" Rowan, "We're okay." Callum, "I'm invested." Before Rowan could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Callum stood outside, coat damp from drizzle, holding a brown deli bag. Rowan let him in, surprised but not unwelcome. Inside the bag was homemade chicken soup, applesauce, and a few gentle snacks for sick days. He set it down carefully, almost shyly. "I didn't know what she might eat," he said. Rowan warmed the soup, while Callum walked quietly to the living room. He paused near the couch, not wanting to disturb Maisie. The child blinked awake, cheeks flushed, and offered him a sleepy smile. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course," he answered, settling onto the floor beside her so she didn't have to lift her head to see him. Maisie drifted back to sleep, her hands slipping toward the edge of the blanket. Without thinking, Callum adjusted it gently, tucking it around her shoulder like he'd done it many times before. Rowan watched from the doorway. There was no performance in his movements, just simple, genuine care. She sat with him afterward, the two of them eating warm soup in the quiet living room, while rain tapped softly against the windows. "She trusts you," Rowan said. Callum kept his eyes on the sleeping child. "I'm glad," he murmured. "No one should be sick without someone who cares beside them." Rowan felt something soften inside her, a warmth she hadn't expected. "Thank you for being here." He shook his head lightly. "You don't have to thank me. I wanted to be." They spent the next hour in gentle silence. Rowan monitored the fever. Callum stayed close, reading softly from one of Maisie's picture books whenever she stirred. The three of them settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural, quiet, steady, almost like a small family weathering a simple, ordinary storm together. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in a thin veil of drizzle clinging to the windows. Rowan moved softly through the apartment, checking on Maisie before anything else. The little girl still slept on the couch, curled beneath her quilt, her breathing steadier and her fever already drifting lower. Rowan brushed a hand across her forehead. "Better," she whispered. While she was warming oatmeal in the kitchen, a gentle knock sounded. She opened the door to find Callum again, coat damp, hair slightly mussed, holding a small grocery bag with fruit, tea, and a loaf of warm honey wheat bread. "I just wanted to see how she's doing," he said, almost apologetically. Rowan let him in without hesitation. "She's improving." Maisie stirred at the sound of their voices. When she noticed Callum, her tired smile widened just enough to show recognition. "You came back." "Of course," he said softly. He sat beside the couch, not too close, not imposing, just steady and present. Maisie reached out a small hand toward him, and he wrapped his fingers around hers with such care that Rowan felt something warm bloom unexpectedly in her chest. Rowan brought him a cup of chamomile tea. "You didn't have to come." "I know," he answered gently, "but I wanted to." "Oh." The morning passed in a quiet, easy rhythm. Rowan fed Maisie a few spoonfuls of oatmeal. Callum read her favorite picture book again, giving each character a soft voice that made Maisie smile through her lingering fatigue. When she fell back asleep, Rowan finally sat down, exhaustion softening her posture. Callum glanced at her, concern lingering. "You were up all night," he murmured. "That's motherhood," she replied with a tired smile. "I can watch her while you rest," he offered quietly. "If you're comfortable with that." Rowan hesitated, then nodded. Something about his presence felt safe, steady, an anchor she didn't often allow herself. She rested for a short while on the recliner. When she woke, Maisie was still sleeping peacefully, and Callum hadn't moved from his spot beside the couch. He looked up, relief flickering across his face. "She's down to 99, he whispered. "Good sign, right?" "It's a very good sign," Rowan answered, touched by the care in his voice. The rain continued tapping gently against the window, and in the warm, quiet living room, the three of them shared a peaceful stillness, simple, unforced, like a small family settling into its own quiet rhythm. By late afternoon, Maisie was awake more often, her fever now only a soft warmth on her skin. She managed a few sips of water and even smiled when Rowan offered her a small bowl of applesauce. Her strength was returning in gentle waves. Callum stayed nearby, not hovering, just present in a way that felt steady and reassuring. Rowan noticed he kept adjusting the blanket around Maisie, smoothing it every time she shifted. For a man used to boardrooms and pressure, he moved with surprising gentleness here. "You can head back to work if you need to," Rowan murmured, while rinsing a bowl in the sink. "I don't," he replied simply. "I want to see the day through." Maisie perked up enough to tug his sleeve. "Can you read the fox story again?" Callum sat beside her and opened the book. His voice was soft, giving each character its own warmth. Maisie listened closely, eyes half closed, comforted more by the cadence than the words. Rowan watched them from the armchair, and something in her eased, like seeing two pieces click into place she hadn't known were meant to fit. When the story ended, Maisie whispered, "You read nice." Callum smiled, a little shy. "I'm glad you think so." Rowan checked Maisie's temperature. 99. "She's almost through it." Callum exhaled quietly, relief showing more clearly than he intended. "Good." They shared a simple dinner at Rowan's small kitchen table, leftover soup and warm bread. It wasn't fancy, but Callum treated it with the same care he would. A formal meal, listening intently as Rowan talked about Maisie's routines, school, the small things that made her who she was. "You know her well," he said softly. Rowan smiled at the understatement. "She's my whole world." Callum looked toward the couch where Maisie rested, her breathing soft and even. "I can see that." When dinner was done, they returned to the living room. Rowan adjusted the lamp. Callum straightened the fox book on the table. "Small things, shared things." "You were a big help today," Rowan said quietly. He met her eyes. "It felt right to be here." Maisie stirred again, half asleep, and reached instinctively toward both of them, one small hand drifting toward Callum, the other toward her mother. Rowan's breath caught. Callum gently held her tiny fingers, his expression softening in a way that revealed more than words could. The apartment hummed with a warm, calm silence, the kind that settled in slowly and stayed. Rowan stood beside him, close enough to feel the shared quiet. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was carrying everything alone. And Callum, sitting there with Maisie's hand curled lightly in his, looked like a man who had stepped without quite realizing it into the beginnings of a place he belonged. Maisie woke the next morning with clearer eyes and a steadier voice, the fever now just a faint memory. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, soft and warm, giving the apartment a gentle glow. Rowan checked her daughter's temperature one last time and smiled with relief. "Back to normal," she said. Maisie stretched her arms. "Can I draw?" "That's a good sign," Rowan murmured, handing her the small box of crayons. A few minutes later, a knock sounded at the door, lighter than usual, familiar. When Rowan opened it, Callum stood there holding a small bag of blueberries and a folded note from the daycare. "I brought these," he said, "and they made a get-well card for her. Son." Maisie perked up instantly. "For me?" He handed her the card, and she grinned at the crayon-drawn hearts scattered across it. "Look, Mom." Rowan couldn't help smiling. "They missed you." Maisie crawled onto the rug and began drawing again, humming softly to herself. Callum watched her for a moment, then took a seat on the floor beside her, loosening his tie slightly, a small sign of comfort he didn't seem aware of. "What are you drawing today?" he asked. "A house," Maisie said, pressing a blue crayon firmly into the paper. "With 3 people." Rowan glanced over from the kitchen, heart pausing for just a beat. "3?" Maisie nodded matter-of-factly. "Me, Mom, and—" she tapped the paper. "Him." Callum blinked, caught off guard. "Oh." She handed him the page. "You're tall." Rowan laughed quietly. "She notices everything." Callum studied the drawing for a long moment. 3 figures beneath a bright yellow sundae. No hesitation. No question, just certainty in a child's heart. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Rowan poured coffee for both of them, and they sat at the small table, while Maisie continued coloring. It was an ordinary scene, yet something about it felt new, like a morning, familiar to them all, even though it had never happened before. "Thank you again," Rowan said, "for yesterday, and for today." "You don't need to thank me," Callum replied, but his voice softened. "Being here, it feels right." Rowan didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, seeing a man who had stepped so naturally into their small world that she wasn't sure when the boundaries had shifted, only that they had. Maisie trotted over and wrapped her arms around both of their legs at once, as only a child could do, simple, wholehearted, without thought. "You two sit too much," she declared. Callum laughed, warm and unguarded. "We'll try to fix that." "Yeah." And as Maisie pulled them toward the living room, chattering about her next drawing, Rowan felt something quiet and tender settle in the room, something that made the air lighter, the morning softer, and the future feel just a little closer than before. A beginning, she thought, or maybe the continuation of one. By late afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, sending soft beams of golden light across Rowan's living room. Maisie, fully recovered, darted around the space with the restless energy of a child who had spent too much time sick on a couch. "Mom, look," she called, holding up 2 mismatched socks she'd pulled from the laundry basket. Rowan shook her head, amused. "You're supposed to be resting." "I am resting," Maisie insisted, hopping on one foot. Callum chuckled from the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame, coat draped over his arm. He'd stopped by after work, just to check in. Though the relaxed way he held himself said he felt no need to justify being there anymore. Maisie ran over to him, thrusting the socks in his direction. "Which one looks faster?" Callum knelt to her level, studying them with exaggerated seriousness. The one with stripes is definitely faster. The polka dot one looks more sneaky." Maisie gasped. "A sneaky sock?" Rowan laughed from the kitchen, stirring a pot of vegetable stew. The sound drifted warm and familiar through the room. "You're encouraging chaos." "Only mild chaos," Callum replied, grinning as he stood. He joined Rowan in the kitchen, rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt without a second thought. "What can I do?" She arched an eyebrow. "You cook?" "No," he admitted, "but I chop vegetables in straight lines. Very straight lines." Rowan handed him a cutting board and a carrot. "Let's see. Now." He focused far too intently on the task, making Rowan laugh as he lined up each slice with the care of a surgeon. "You do realize this is stew, right? Everything gets mixed together." "Still," Callum insisted, "precision matters." "It really doesn't," she teased. He looked up then, soft eyes. Small smile, and Rowan felt something warm settle between them, light as a whisper but unmistakable. Dinner was simple, but it felt like something more. Maisie chattered about her drawings. Callum asked questions with patient interest. Rowan watched them both with a quiet fullness in her chest she hadn't realized she'd been missing. After they ate, Callum offered to wash the dishes. Rowan tried to protest, but he simply stepped to the sink and turned on the water. "You cooked," he said. "I can handle this." He washed slowly, carefully, as if the modest plates and cups mattered just as much as anything in his penthouse kitchen. Rowan dried beside him, the small domestic ritual unfolding with surprising ease, two people moving naturally in a shared space, as though they had done it 100 times before. From the living room, Maisie's soft voice floated toward them. She was humming to herself while coloring, lost in her own small world. Callum glanced toward her, then at Rowan. "She's a remarkable kid." "She is." Rowan paused. "She likes you. A lot." He swallowed, the honesty in his voice unguarded. "I like her too." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but meaningful, like a breath held between pages of a story still being written. When the kitchen was clean, Rowan walked him to the door. Maisie ran over and wrapped her arms around his leg in a spontaneous hug. "You have to come back tomorrow," she declared. Callum looked down at her, surprised, touched, softened. "If it's all right with your mom," he said gently. Rowan nodded, small but real. "It's all right." Maisie beamed. "Then you have to." Callum straightened, meeting Rowan's eyes. Gratitude, affection, and something deeper flickered there, but he didn't push, didn't rush. He simply said, "Good night, Rowan." "Good night, Maisie." "Good night," Maisie waved. Rowan closed the door softly after he left, leaning for a moment against the quiet wood. In the calm glow of the apartment, with her daughter humming and her heart still warm, she realized it had been a very long time since the evening felt this full. A week later, life settled into a gentle routine again. The autumn air in Bellingham turned crisp, and the trees outside Hayes Medical Group shimmered in gold. Maisie was fully recovered, bursting into the daycare each morning with her usual enthusiasm. Callum found himself stopping by, often, sometimes with a snack for Maisie, sometimes just to say good morning to Rowan. What began as concern had become habit, and then something quieter, steadier. That morning, Rowan arrived to find Callum replacing a flickering clinic light bulb. "You know you're the CEO, right?" she teased. He smiled softly. "I don't mind helping." Later, Maisie ran in holding a hand turkey drawing. "Look, I made this." Callum knelt to her height. "It's wonderful." "May I keep it?" "Put it in your office so you remember me," she said. "I won't forget you," he answered, and Rowan felt warmth rise in her chest. At lunch, they shared a simple meal across the street. Rowan talked about her childhood. Callum listened like it mattered. When they returned, Maisie grabbed both their hands without thinking, swinging happily between them. "We're all going home," she said. Rowan paused at that just a second, because the words felt larger than the moment. And as they walked toward the elevator together, she realized something simple and true. This was beginning to feel like a small family, forming in quiet ways none of them had planned. It was nearing the end of the day when the calm rhythm they'd grown used to shifted. Rowan was gathering her things, Maisie humming beside her, when Callum stepped out of his office to walk them to the elevator, something he had begun doing almost every evening. They had barely reached the lobby when a stranger's voice cut through the quiet. "Rowan?" Rowan froze. Callum instinctively moved a half-step closer to her, sensing the tension in her posture. The man approaching wore an expensive jacket and held himself with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. His eyes flicked briefly to Callum, assessing, measuring before landing on Rowan again. "David?" Rowan breathed, her voice tightening. Maisie hid slightly behind her mother's leg. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you work here now. You look good." Rowan stiffened. "Why are you here?" "I came to see my daughter," he said, glancing down at Maisie with a possessiveness that made Callum's jaw tighten. "I've changed. I'm ready to be in her life." Maisie pressed closer to Rowan, confused. "Mom, who is he?" Rowan swallowed. "Honey, this is—" Callum stepped forward, his voice steady but calm. "Maybe we should move this conversation somewhere private." David's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "A friend," Callum answered simply. Maisie reached for Callum's hand without thinking, and he gently held it, offering quiet reassurance. The gesture made something flicker across David's face, surprise, then irritation. "I have every right to see her," David insisted. Rowan exhaled slowly. "You lost that right when you walked away." The lobby grew still. A security guard glanced over, sensing the tension but not intervening. David's tone sharpened. "I'm not leaving without being heard." Rowan stood her ground. "You've been gone for 5 years. You don't get to just walk back in." Maisie tugged Rowan's sleeve. "Mom, can we go home?" Rowan nodded gently, her voice soft. "Yes, sweetheart." David's eyes hardened, but he didn't move to stop them. Callum placed a steadying hand at Rowan's back, a silent gesture, protective but respectful, and the three of them walked toward the exit together. Maisie held both their hands now. Behind them, David watched, his expression unreadable. Outside, the air was cold, but Rowan felt something warm and solid beside her. Callum's quiet presence, unwavering. Without saying a word, he opened the car door for her, and as Maisie climbed in, still holding tight to both of them, Rowan realized, whatever storm was coming, she wouldn't be facing it alone. In the soft quiet, after everything they had endured, their little world settled into something steady and warm, like the hush that follows a long snowfall outside a small-town porch. A child who no longer felt alone, a mother who finally breathed without fear, and a man who learned that a home isn't built from brick and money, but from gentle hands and everyday presence. Their steps, once separate, now moved together with the calm certainty of people who had found where they truly belonged. And beneath all of it lay a simple truth. Love and redemption are powerful enough to rebuild what life once broke. Kindness, offered without conditions, can turn strangers into family, just as the soft glow of a kitchen lamp can guide someone home on a cold November evening. No matter our age, our past, or our mistakes, each of us deserves a place at the table, a warm chair, and the feeling of being chosen. Happiness grows in quiet acts, reading a bedtime story, sharing a meal, showing up when it matters. So, as you sit with this story, maybe the way you linger over warm coffee on a peaceful morning, take a moment to reflect on the people who have held your heart through life's changing seasons. If this tale touched you, press 1. If it didn't, or if you'd like to offer a thought so the next story feels closer to you, press 0.